The year was 1962, and the world found itself divided into two ideological camps: the capitalist West, led by the United States, and the communist East, led by the Soviet Union. The Cold War, a prolonged political and military tension, had endured for over a decade and was now reaching its zenith. Both superpowers had amassed substantial arsenals of nuclear weapons, capable of extinguishing millions of lives in mere seconds. The threat of nuclear war loomed ominously over the globe, casting a shadow of fear and uncertainty. In October, the Cold War teetered dangerously close to transforming into a hot conflict. The United States uncovered the Soviet Union's covert installation of nuclear missiles in Cuba, a communist ally located only 90 miles away from the United States mainland. These missiles could reach most of the eastern United States within minutes, posing a grave threat to national security and the balance of power. President John F. Kennedy resolved to impose a naval blockade around Cuba, demanding the Soviets remove the missiles. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, however, refused to back down, asserting that the missiles were purely defensive and that the US had no right to interfere in Cuba's affairs. Thus, the Cuban Missile Crisis unfolded, a 13-day standoff that brought the world perilously close to nuclear war. Following the deployment of American missiles in Italy and Turkey that could target Moscow, Cuba sought protection. The preceding year, Cuban exiles, with the covert support of the United States government, attempted to overthrow Fidel Castro's regime during the Bay of Pigs invasion. In response to American spy planes discovering Soviet missile bases on the island, President Kennedy ordered a blockade, halting all sea traffic. On October 27, American forces detected a Soviet submarine concealed in the Caribbean. While the world anxiously observed the tense diplomatic negotiations between Kennedy and Khrushchev, a gripping drama unfolded beneath the waves of the Caribbean Sea. A squadron of 4 Soviet submarines armed with nuclear torpedoes was en route to Cuba to reinforce the missile deployment. One of these submarines was the B-59, commanded by Valentin Savitsky, with Vasily Arkhipov serving as his second-in-command, a 36-year-old naval officer who had previously survived a nuclear disaster a year earlier. The B-59 was on a top-secret mission to Cuba, along with 3 other Soviet submarines. Arkhipov and his crew remained oblivious to the unfolding crisis above them. They had lost contact with Moscow and had no idea what was happening in the world. They were operating in a hostile environment, surrounded by US warships that were trying to force them to the surface. The US Navy dropped depth charges, not intending to destroy the submarines, but to signal them to emerge out of the water. Unfortunately, the Soviets were unaware of this, interpreting the depth charges as the opening salvo of a nuclear war. The submarine was running low on oxygen, battery power, and morale, with temperatures exceeding 45 degrees and deafening noise levels. The crew, exhausted, dehydrated, and terrified, was on the brink. Captain Valentin Savitsky felt both furious and desperate and believed his crew was on the verge of obliteration. An intelligence officer aboard the submarine later recounted the emotional outburst of the exhausted captain. "We're going to blast them now. We will die, but we will sink them all. We will not become the shame of the fleet." Convinced that defending himself and his country was the only option, Savitsky resolved to launch a nuclear torpedo at the nearest US warship, aiming to create a gap in the blockade and facilitate an escape. The nuclear torpedo held the destructive power equivalent to the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Moscow had already authorized the crew to launch the torpedo if they deemed it necessary. Had it been launched and hit one of the nearby US vessels, it could have triggered a chain reaction, leading to a full-scale nuclear war and causing global devastation with an unimaginable loss of life. However, this catastrophic scenario did not unfold, thanks to Arkhipov, a 34-year-old flotilla commander responsible for 3 submarines on that secret mission. His wife described him as a modest, soft-spoken man. Despite being the head commander of the fleet, Savitsky needed the approval of 2 other officers, Ivan Maslenikov and the executive officer Vasily Arkhipov. While Maslenikov sided with Savitsky, Arkhipov did not. Arkhipov's decision was not only courageous but also rational. He understood that launching a nuclear torpedo would escalate the conflict, potentially triggering a full-scale nuclear war. He also recognized that the depth charges were not an act of war, but a communications signal, and demonstrated an ability to see the bigger picture and act in the best interest of humanity. Arkhipov argued for patience, urging the crew to await orders from Moscow and avoid escalating the situation. He appealed to Savitsky's sense of duty and loyalty to the Soviet Union. Through persuasive efforts, he succeeded in calming down Savitsky and convincing him to surface the submarine. Simultaneously, as these events unfolded, President Kennedy expressed concern that the Russians might misinterpret the depth charges as an attack. Robert Kennedy, the president's brother, later described the heightened stress levels. These few minutes were the time of greatest worry for the president. His hand went up to his face and covered his mouth as he closed his fist. In the end, the nuclear torpedo was not launched. Arkhipov's words had a profound effect on Savitsky, eventually leading to the decision to abort the launch of the nuclear torpedo. Savitsky commanded the submarine to surface and establish contact with Soviet naval headquarters. As the B-59 emerged from the depths, it encountered the presence of US ships and planes. The revelation that a torpedo was on board remained unknown to the US for 40 years. It only came to light during a reunion where former enemies shared the story for the first time. Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense during the Kennedy administration, later described Arkhipov's act as one that greatly benefited mankind. McNamara's daughter, Elena, noted that her father acted with the awareness of potential disasters arising from radiation. The B-59 was escorted to a safe distance from Cuba and allowed to return to the Soviet Union. A few days later, the Cuban Missile Crisis was peacefully resolved when Kennedy and Khrushchev reached an agreement to remove missiles from Cuba and Turkey. Vasily Arkhipov's decision to prevent the launch of the nuclear torpedo stands as a heroic act of restraint and reason, but also prevented a potential nuclear war that could have brought an end to civilization as we know it. Arkhipov's decision had profound personal and global consequences. On a personal level, he faced the disapproval of his superiors, who reprimanded him for disobeying orders and jeopardizing the mission. Some fellow officers ostracized him, viewing him as a traitor and a coward. Arkhipov had to live with the weight of his choice and the knowledge of what could have transpired. On a global scale, Arkhipov's decision averted a nuclear catastrophe and potentially saved millions of lives. Furthermore, his choice contributed to the crisis resolution by enabling communication and negotiation between US and Soviet leaders, leading to a peaceful settlement. His decision also left a lasting impact on the future of nuclear weapons, exposing the dangers of granting excessive power and autonomy to military commanders. This prompted the establishment of more safeguards and protocols to prevent accidental or unauthorized use of nuclear weapons. The world collectively breathed a sigh of relief as the Cuban Missile Crisis concluded on October 28, 1962. With the agreement for the Soviet Union to withdraw its missiles from Cuba and the US to remove its missiles from Turkey and Italy. Widely considered the closest the world ever came to a nuclear war, the crisis marked a turning point in the Cold War. However, tensions between the US and the Soviet Union persisted. The crisis laid bare the fragility of the nuclear balance and the vulnerability of both sides to miscalculation and miscommunication. It also heightened the arms race, with both nations striving to enhance their nuclear capabilities and strategies. The crisis catalyzed various political and social changes, including the rise of the anti-nuclear movement, the establishment of the hotline between Washington and Moscow, and the development of the doctrine of mutual assured destruction. Historian Thomas Blanton aptly described Arkhipov as a man who saved the world. Despite his pivotal role, Arkhipov remained humble and modest, never seeking recognition or fame for his deed. He passed away in 1998 at the age of 72 due to radiation-related illnesses. Regrettably, Arkhipov's recognition was lacking during his lifetime. His own government kept his deed classified, and he received no honors or celebrations. The international community was unaware of his role and contribution, and the public remained oblivious to his existence and sacrifice. Arkhipov's recognition only came after his death, thanks to the efforts of a few individuals who unveiled and publicized his story. In 2002, a documentary film titled "The Man Who Saved the World" brought Archipov's heroism to light, featuring interviews with his widow and former colleagues. In 2017, the Future of Life Institute acknowledged Archipov with the Future of Life Award, recognizing his exceptional contribution to the preservation of life and the reduction of existential risk. The United Nations further honored Archipov in 2018 by declaring October 27 as the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, acknowledging him as one of the heroes instrumental in achieving this goal. His global actions prevented a nuclear catastrophe that could have unleashed a global war. As we contemplate the world in all its forms and splendor, it's crucial to remember that, were it not for a naval officer who endeavored to calm a captain amid depth charges, extreme heat, stress, and isolation, we probably would not be here today. If you like this video, click on the screen to watch other videos like this one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on the notification bell to get notified when we post a new video.